Hi, I'm Gavin,
I'm Oscar.
and welcome back to the S.O.U.N.D Project. Today we're going to do a case study. We've done, I think, maybe just one of these in the past on the podcast, but I thought that it'd be fun to kind of look back at an older project. Also, the fact that his jersey hangs in the background of our podcast episode every week. We're going to talk about Paul George's recording studio that we did.
Pretty freaking cool.
Yeah.
When I was starting, that was one of the projects that I saw. I was like, Paul George, he plays for the Pacers. I love the Pacers. This is so exciting.
Which he has since obviously moved on to play for the Clippers, and then he just got traded to Philadelphia. So he's playing for Philadelphia next year. But so with Paul's project, it was definitely, I always talk about how most of our referrals come through a very systematic way. It's like, okay, there's a dealer who knows us and recommends us to a client or whatever, and it's very streamlined. With Paul's, he actually asked his landscaper if he knew how to design studios. And he said, of course, no, I don't know how to do that, but I have a friend who designs speakers. So he introduced him to that friend, and his friend worked place that designs speakers, but then he's like, I don't design studios, but there's this guy in my neighborhood who walks his dog, and his son does that. And he told me that, he told me about it one day. So in a roundabout way, my dad talking about me to a neighbor got us the Paul George job.
Wow.
So,
Shout out to Mr. Haverstein.
Yeah, I know. He made it happen. So, so we met with Paul. This is actually, the timing of this project was really nice because it's a local project, which we don't have a ton of those. And it was happening right at the time when my son was going to be born. It was I was trying not to travel as frequently because it's getting closer to the due date, and we were working on this project over that time. And it also happened not long after Paul broke his leg. He was playing in the Olympic trials, and I don't know if anyone's seen that video before, but I don't recommend seeking it out.
Watch.
Yeah, your leg is not supposed to bend in that way at that location. But he had broken his leg. There's all this kind of speculation, is he ever going to return to how good he was before that? And so when I arrived at his house the first time, he was in a cast, and he, on crutches, and it was kind of interesting over the course of the project, just getting to know him and just seeing how determined he was to come back from that injury and all the rehab that he was doing. Every time I was over there, he was doing something different. And obviously he came back to be all-star level again.
That's pretty crazy. And so you got to know him a lot throughout the process?
Yeah, I was over there quite a bit. I probably made at least 10 trips or so over to his place. And he's kind of building this studio. He had this house on Geist area, and he was wanting to build a studio because he likes to do music, but then also his roommate was really into producing music. And so I think he was kind of building it for him as well. And my first trip over there was just kind of to take a look at the space and kind of figure out, what do we need to do. But then also kind of quickly brought in some partners on the job because obviously it takes a team effort to do any of these things. And so I just put the logos up of the three companies that we worked closely with. Triphase Technologies is out of Zionsville here, and they actually did the build of Tyler Joseph's basement studio years later. But this was the first studio project we did with them. And then Simplified Acoustics, which we work with a lot, did all the stretch fabric and acoustical treatment installation. And then I remember when I first arrived there, Paul and BA, they just had they had a small setup, like an interface, a microphone, some small KRK speakers, and that was it, a laptop, And so I started asking, Paul, where he buys gear from. He's like, I don't really have a place. Do you have any recommendations? Someone local, maybe? And I was like, well, in Fort Wayne, there's Sweetwater. And so he ended up driving up there and meeting with Mike Peacock at Sweetwater and bought all the gear through them. So these three companies obviously helped bring our design to life, and we worked really closely with them throughout the project. Nice. Kind of show a little bit of just the image of what the studio looked like before. Before it was just this empty room, and it's it kind of was set up naturally for a control room and a vocal booth type of setup, where there's this door here that naturally leads into this smaller closet. It was above the garage, so there's this kind of A-framed shape that is going on with it, and the back of the room here. Actually, I don't have another picture of the back of the room, but the back of the room just had this little alcove area that was a little strange for a control room because it was asymmetrical and usually something that we don't need, but I'll show a little bit what we did with that. One of the first things I talked to Paul about, I was like, well, how much isolation do you need? Because he wasn't really super close to neighbors. Like there were some neighbors that were close, but he was like, you know what, we're gonna have friends over a lot, and I don't. If I have a game the next day, I want to be able to sleep. I want to be able to get some rest. And this studio was above the garage, but it was really close to his master bedroom. So we ended up doing. There's not enough room in there to do a room within a room like we like to when we can. So we ended up using some Kinetics ISOMAX clips, drywall furring channel, 1/2-inch drywall, mass-loaded vinyl, and 5/8 drywall. And that was the setup all the way around the room, both on the walls and the ceiling. And then we also beefed up the floor in the process. The next thing is we had to come up with a layout of how these rooms are going to work. Obviously, we need the mix position to play well with where we're going to place speakers in there. He ended up going with the ATC 110 speakers, which are also the same ones that we put in Tyler Joseph's basement. So Triphase had some experience with that. But we ended up building them into soffits in the front of the room. And in the back of the room, you can kind of see this little L-shaped section. We ended up turning that into a tuned bass trap, but then in front of that, there was a place to store cables and gear and different things like that. And with this setup, one of the big things that I was concerned about was just getting the spacing right and making sure it felt comfortable. Because if obviously it's not a purpose-built space with that A-frame and it was kind of narrow. I just wanted to make sure it still felt comfortable for him and getting everything lined up. One of the things to make it feel comfortable for him is that I took this CAD block of a dapper gentleman here and scaled it up so he was 6'8", which is what Paul is. And I wanted to make sure when he walked around the corner of his console that he didn't have to duck his head or feel like it was too claustrophobic. So I don't know if we have that in our CAD template or not, but we probably should.
I know we have one similar to this, but with your head on it that we like placing at mixed position sometimes. But I don't know if we have this mustachio gentleman in front of us.
I don't know. We'll work on getting that in there. So there's some construction pics. So we had to take down the drywall that was existing because you don't want to add those clips on top of drywall. You want to rip it down to the studs and start from there. So this is just taking it down to that level, making sure everything was insulated well. You see insulation in all the ceiling and wall cavities. And you see the start of the channel systems on the walls there on the left. And a couple more photos there is kind of cross section. You see a little bit of the channels before, or the clips before the channels get installed into it. And those are just evenly spaced to distribute the weight of all this extra mass that we're adding to the walls. And that picture is actually of the cavity back there that would later then become a bass trap. Sure. Again, more photos here of some of the resilient channels being put up, some of the HVAC work that was done there. We ended up adding a separate unit to the studio so that it is just servicing the studio and not tied into the rest of the house for sound isolation. You know how we do that. I like how I'm explaining it to you like you don't already know exactly why we're doing these things.
Yeah, I was going to say, I see the flexible ductwork, it looks like, that leads through comes up through the ceiling joists.
Yeah, and we put the unit ended up being like these A-framed walls. They continue down to the peak at the point, and the unit was able to sit outside of the room on some isolation, like vibration control units. So this is actually when the speakers are starting to go in. So you see the ATC 110s in the soffit area there. The console is actually in the room as well, but it's just covered because there's still dust and things like that that's going to be happening. You even see the saw in the background there in the vocal booth. And this is actually, it's before we were doing renderings, but Triphase has interior designers on staff that put together this sketch of what the room was going to look like.
Very cool.
Yeah. And I even remember something where they had a fabrics that they supplied to us. It was like this checkerboard pattern. And when it arrived, I'm glad they sent a sample because it actually had a leather, like a kind of like a leather backing to it almost.
Oh, yeah.
It was like a really nice high-end fabric, and it looked great, but it just wasn't something we could do acoustically in there. So what we ended up doing is having that same pattern scanned, high-resolution scan done, and then we just printed the fabric. So it's the same look, except it was printed instead of that.
That's awesome. That was going to be one of my questions of where that fabric came from, because it has such a distinct look. And I wasn't familiar with it.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah, so we made it so that acoustically it works for them. You can also see some of the kind of wood lattice system that is going up and over the ceiling in that orange color.
Yeah.
So and this is a kind of the front facing looking into the vocal booth there. Nice. Does not show the speakers yet, but it does show a couch, just a conceptual image. And again, this is before we were doing rendering, so it was nice to be able to see what was going on there. Yeah. And there's some ceiling clouds with lighting built into them as well.
Yeah, and were the ceiling clouds and the wood lattice systems, was that custom built as well, or were some of those off the shelf?
Those were, I think a lot of them were custom built, yeah. And the wood lattice system may have been a product from a manufacturer. I can't remember exactly, but I remember when we were asking Paul what he wanted to look like, he just said he really liked blue and orange for colors, which... eventually, he did play for Oklahoma City, and that's their colors. But yeah, he just had orange and blue. That was kind of like what he was going for, and that was most of the direction that we got.
And was the desk that's drawn there? Because I think that's in the studio, right?
It's similar. I think that before, I don't think that the full equipment was selected yet, so it's just more of a conceptual. But it is like this L-shaped desk that gives you a walking path to get around the side of it. Cool. Yeah. Next, just more construction photos. This is was kind of being used for all things storage at the time, but that was that little alcove that we later turned into a bass trap. You also see on the right side of this picture some diffusers that were installed. Those were the RPG Omnifusers that were used there, and they later got painted, which you will see. Also, some of the stretch fabric systems that Simplified Acoustics put on, you can kind of see there that brown material. That's a formaldehyde-free version of fiberglass, because regular like yellow fiberglass has formaldehyde in it, but this version does not. So a little safer to use. And then you have this stretch fabric system that you can put around the perimeter and then tuck fabric in place, that printed fabric that we went with. Again, another shot of those diffusers. Later, they would get painted, like I said, just to match the aesthetic of the room. And this kind of shows one of the things that shows up in some of the photos, but not all of them, is that behind that wood lattice system is fiber optic ceiling. So you actually see like little stars, like fiber optic stars throughout it. Wow. So that is the start of it, with all those fiber optic strands coming through before they got clipped to the right length. And Simplified Acoustics does an amazing job with those fiber optic ceilings.
It's really cool. Yeah, we've used a few of those systems. I didn't realize that it was used in this one as well. But yeah, we've done that in like the Josh Dunn studio as well, in his isolation booth.
Yeah, and Simplified just does a really cool work with that. Even in Josh Dunn's, in that studio tour of ours that we have, you can see that they're hung at different heights. So those strands were cut at different lengths, and it looks like you're kind of like a 3D effect to it. Yeah. And I did want to put up the equipment list. Like I said, I was working with Mike Peacock at Sweetwater to make this happen, and he did an awesome job of getting him the right equipment that he needed. And one thing that I really admired that Mike did is that, and he always does this, but he got him exactly what he needed and didn't go overboard. Like some people could look at, well, this is Paul George, I could put whatever in there. And he just got him like really good equipment for what he wants to do. So obviously it's a list of some really high quality equipment, but there's not just a ton of outboard gear, because mostly what they were doing was wrapping over different beats that they would either create or receive, and so really high quality products, but not anything too crazy.
Sure.
So. Final photos of the room. It just turned out amazing. When you walk in there, I remember the first time I was in there, Paul was actually out fishing on his boat. Like that's one of his favorite things to do is go fishing. And we ended up getting the speakers done and tuned up, and then we gave him a call and said, like, hey, come check it out. And remember, he's coming from like small pair of KRK speakers and a interface to this, and it was just, I remember just seeing his jaw drop. It was almost like a cartoon of how excited he was to have this in his home.
Yeah, I can't imagine. This is my dream too.
Yeah, right. Yeah, to have this, it's something else. So we got this again. That checkerboard pattern's all printed on the fabric. You've got you can see the fiber optic ceilings there in between the wood lattice system. Those ceiling clouds look really great with those lighting fixtures, and it was just a really comfortable room that sounded great. I remember Mike was tuning up the system, and he was texting me just saying like, man, this room sounds amazing. And then it also has this focal booth that is in there. Well, there's a close up of the ceiling cloud lights. They're kind of cool and unique. And then this is the back of the control room, which has that couch, which in this photo, the couch looks like it's pink. It's actually orange, and it perfectly matches the wood lattice. I'm not sure why the photo showed up this way, and then those diffusers got painted black, but every so often one of the squares was painted orange to match everything. And then on the left side there of the couch, that's where that alcove jutted back, and we turned it into that storage area and bass trap. And actually, the door is covered in the same fabric to where it's like a hidden door that you open it up and you can get access to there.
Very cool.
The couple shots there, the SSL console. We've got some of the gear, which I know that people would be interested in seeing as well. So close-ups of the gear. And then the vocal booth, which was a very interesting fabric that was chosen for it. It's kind of very eye-catching, somewhat difficult to stretch with the stretch fabric system and get all the lines to line up properly. You can kind of see down here where it turns the corner. It's like Simplified Acoustics did a really good job of lining up all of that. Yeah. And it's just a really nice, comfortable vocal booth.
Are the orange stripes that are going across it part of the fabric pattern?
Yeah.
Or is that okay?
Yeah, it's all just part of the fabric, and was just all one big sheet. So
nice.
And then let's see the door. I want to mention this door because it's all the doors in his house were taller, which was nice for him since he is a taller guy. Because most doors are right around 6'8", and he'd have to duck underneath them. But this is a custom door that was made by ISO Store and had a window kit built into it, so that could be the window from the control room to the vocal booth, and They did a little bit of custom painting on the bottom of it, but that's a solid, 350, 400-pound door that helped with the isolation between the rooms.
Sure.
There's Paul, enjoying his studio. He loved it. He was very, very appreciative of all the work that we did on it. We even helped him a little bit with the lobby outside of the studio. They had this extra additional room that we turned into an area where there was PlayStations and just people could hang out there while they're not in the studio, because again, it wasn't a huge space. I wanted to make sure that we gave people a place to comfortably hang out outside of it. Yeah. And then that was that final day that Mike Peacock and I and Paul were there. We made him sit down because he's a giant. Makes us look small, although I think the next picture might even be him standing next to me. Yeah. Anytime someone can put their arm on your shoulder, you know you're a little short. But he was just a really humble guy. That's what I noticed from him, because I asked him early on in the project, well, how in depth do you want to go into this thing? And he actually is like, well, let me think about it for a while. He didn't just say he's Paul George. He could afford whatever he needed to for this studio, but he's like, I just want to be responsible about it. And then he came back maybe a week or so later, and he's like, I've got the means to do this. He's friends with a lot of higher profile artists that would come through town. He mentioned Justin Timberlake, Jay-Z, things like that. He's like, if they come over to my house, I don't want them laughing at my studio. I want it to be a place that people could do some work. So he's like, let's go all out with it. So we had some fun with that, and just getting to know him a little bit, I can just tell that he's just a very driven, and that's why he's so successful.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And you got to add another basketball player to your list.
That's true.
Yeah,
we have a starting five. So we have, I don't know if I could rattle them all off. There's Michael Jordan, Latrell Sprewell, Ron Artest, Paul George, and Scott Pollard.
Wow. And
then coming off the bench, we actually have Kyle Korver. So nice. I don't even know if we could have him come off the bench, though, because he's a three-point threat. So I was
going to say, you know a bit more about basketball than me. How good would this team be?
Honestly, I think that would be a solid roster.
Yeah.
What we're missing is a little bit of height, but
big man?
Scott Pollard can bring that. So I don't know. We got that kind of level. Actually, I think Jordan, maybe Paul George, and Ron Artest all won Defensive Player of the Year. So
Wow.
yeah, and Latrell Sprewell is no hack at defense either. So yeah, I think we'd be pretty intense.
It's a pretty physical team.
Yeah. But I just wanted to kind of showcase this thing because it's been a while since we've finished it, and but it's always nice to kind of look back at older projects, and this was a real fun one to be a part of.
Yeah, and I know you're like obsessed with basketball.
Yeah.
So I imagine this would be pretty cool for you.
It was very cool. I mean, obviously at the time, like Paul was playing for the Pacers, and that's another part about this story is that about a year later he got traded. So it's like we just finished the studio, and then I hope he sold the house to someone who likes music. He got traded, and in that trade, Victor Oladipo was part of it.
Yeah.
And Victor is a musician as well, and I was kind of hoping they could just do a house swap.
They just swapped lives completely.
Yeah,
He just moved into his house.
But yeah, it was really fun to work on this with him, and he was just really kind and gracious the whole time, and that's always nice to see.
Yeah, very cool.
That's been another episode of the S.O.U.N.D Project. Thanks for being a part of it. I'm really curious who your favorite basketball player in history has been. Please comment that below, and we'll see you next week.